5'11", but my status make me 6'8". The way I'm shooting, my recruiter is from big state. The way I'm balling, I should probably have a mixtape. Feds on production. Baby help me count it, plus her head on concussion. Know they hate to see it, cause the gang so lit. Thick rope, made my son think he can swing on it. And I ain't gon' spit, less it come with a price. You bang on Mitch, better run for your life, cause it's tragic. But it was cool while it lasted. Go stuffing with his partner, save up on the cash. Off gaps and my brody on 10. Clearing out the crowd like they know we gon' win. Know the feeling ain't the same when we touch. I'm still tripping off a cane and a crutch.
Welcome to Old Man Sports Talk. I'm your host, Old Man Nate. It's week 2 of our preseason shows. This week, we break down the Big Ten Conference. I will go over every team in the Big Ten and give my win-loss predictions for each team. I will also give my prediction on who will win the Big Ten championship and who will be this year's champion. I also want to take this time to remind everyone that there's 4 new teams in the Big Ten this year. Oregon, UCLA, USC, and Washington all left the Pac-12 for the Big Ten. Now there are 18 schools in the Big Ten. They might need to consider renaming the conference to the Big 18 or just the Big Conference. Also, there will not be any divisions this year, so the top 2 teams with the best record will play in the Big Ten championship. If there are teams tied for the lead or a berth into the championship when it gets closer to the end of the season, I will then break down the tiebreaker scenarios to give everyone a chance to see if their team has a chance to make the championship. Let's break down each team and we will go in alphabetical order. Illinois is coming off a 5-7 season. They returned 6 players on offense, including their starting quarterback in Luke Altmaier. The junior quarterback threw for 1,800 yards, 13 touchdowns, but he had 10 interceptions. He is going to have to be much better this year in order for the Illini to improve from last year. On defense, Illinois returned 7 starters, including 4 out of 5 leading tacklers from last year. They're going to rely heavily on that experience to get the job done this season. Illinois has a very tough road games at Nebraska, Penn State, and Oregon this year. They also get Kansas and Michigan at home. All those games will be very tough for them to win. I have Illinois improving by 1 game this year and going 6-6, 4-5 in conference. Indiana is coming off a 3-9 season last season, but I predict will be one of the most improved teams from a year ago. The Hoosiers have 10 returning starters and transfer quarterback Curtis Rourke. Rourke transfers from Ohio, where he spent 4 seasons and threw for over 7,600 yards, 50 touchdowns, and only 16 interceptions in 4 years. If he's able to throw the ball in the Big Ten like he did in the MAC, then Indiana will have a very good year. Indiana has all 11 starters on defense returning from a team that gave up 394 yards a game and 30 points a game last year. If the defense makes a huge improvement from last year, then the Hoosiers should be better than 3-9 record from last year. Indiana very well could be 6-0 heading into a home game against Nebraska on October 19th. They also get Washington and Michigan at home this year and travel to UCLA and Ohio State. I'm picking Indiana to go 9-3 this year and 6-3 in conference. Iowa had one of the best defenses in the country last year, but had one of the worst offenses. They managed to win 10 games last year despite not being able to move the ball consistently. The Hawkeyes do return 10 starters on offense, and Cade McNamara, who transferred from Michigan 2 years ago, is the projected starter. Iowa is going to have a much improved offense, is going to need a much improved offense in order to contend for the Big Ten championship. They returned 8 starters on defense, so their defense should not be an issue. They do have a favorable schedule. They get Iowa State, Washington, Wisconsin, and Nebraska all at home this year. Ohio State, UCLA, and Maryland are the toughest games I see on the road. If Iowa's offense is much improved, then they will compete for the Big Ten championship. I have Iowa going 11-1 and 8-1 in conference. Maryland is coming off a 6-5 season. I'm sorry, an 8-5 season, but lost most of their offense. They only returned 4 starters on offense and will have a new signal caller in MJ Morris. Morris, who spent two years at North Carolina State, played in 9 games over 2 years, throwing for over 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. 7 of those 9 games he played in, he did start. If he can gel quickly with his new teammates, then Maryland could surprise some teams. The Terrapins also do return 8 players on defense, so they should be okay on that side of the ball. Home games against UConn, USC, and Iowa will be tough to win. Maryland goes to Indiana, Oregon, and Penn State this year. I don't think they win any of the games I just mentioned, so I have Maryland going 4-8 this season, 2-7 in conference. Michigan State heads into the 2024 season with first-year head coach Jonathan Smith, who spent the last 4 years at Oregon State. He leaves Oregon State with a record of 34-35. Michigan State finished last season with a 4-8 record and returned only 5 offensive starters, but do return their leading rusher from last year, Nate Carter, who rushed for 798 yards and 4 touchdowns. They also returned their leading receiver in Montorie Foster, who caught 43 passes for 576 yards and 3 touchdowns. On defense, the Spartans returned 10 players, including linebacker Cal Halliday, who led the team in tackles with 91 tackles and sacks with 4.5 a year ago. The defense is going to have to be the strength of the Spartans, and hopefully the offense can put up some points against a very tough schedule. Michigan State gets 2 winnable non-conference games in FAU and Prairie View A&M. Home games against Ohio State, Iowa, and Indiana will be tough to win, and road games against Boston College, Oregon, and Michigan will be even tougher. It will be a long season for the Spartans as I have them going 2-10 overall and 0-9 in conference. Michigan is coming off of back-to-back Big Ten championships and a national championship, but they're heading into 2024 with punishment from the NCAA looming over their head. A new head coach in Sharon Moore, who was the interim coach twice last season when Coach Harbaugh was suspended, and only returning 2 starters on offense. Michigan is loaded with talent, including quarterback Alex Orji, running back Donovan Edwards, and tight end Colston Loveland. The Wolverines are known for ground and pound and will have to continue to do that if Michigan is going to win their 3rd straight Big Ten championship. The defense, who has been the strength of their team the last 2 years, only returned 5 starters on defense. Both edge rushers, Hosea Stewart and Derek Moore, returned and will once again be after the quarterback, as both of them led the Wolverines in sacks with 5 each last season. Will Johnson will be back at corner. He led the team in interceptions last season with 4. If the new guys can fit in nicely and the Wolverines are able to block out all the noise about punishment coming down the Wolverines, will again compete for the Big Ten championship. Early games, though, will test the heart of the Wolverines. They open the season at home against Fresno State, and then Texas comes to town the following week. They also have home games against USC and Oregon, road games against Washington, Indiana, and Ohio State. I don't believe Michigan will be able to block out the noise and compete for the Big Ten championship. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see though. But I have the Wolverines going 9-3 overall, 7-2 in conference. Coach PJ Fleck returns for his 8th year as the Minnesota Golden Gophers head coach. Coming off a 6-7 year, this may be his toughest test yet. Just a couple of years ago, they was competing for a shot in the Big Ten championship, but that will be tough to do this season. Minnesota does have 8 returning starters on offense, including running back Darius Taylor, who ran for 805 yards and 5 touchdowns, and Daniel Jackson, who caught 59 passes for 831 yards and 8 touchdowns. A new signal caller, though, will be the question on offense. The Gophers also returned 8 players on defense, including 8 of the top 11 tacklers from last year. But a very tough schedule has me thinking that Coach Fleck will be on the hot seat this season. They open the season against North Carolina, have home games against Iowa, USC, and Penn State. Road games at Michigan, UCLA, Illinois, and Wisconsin sets up to be a long season for Minnesota fans. I have the Golden Gophers going 3-9 overall and 1-8 in conference. Coach Matt Rhule is in his 2nd season at Nebraska and has Husker Nation excited about the 2024 season. Nebraska went 5-7 last season, and if they had a decent quarterback, they could have won 8 or 9 games. With an offense that returns 9 players and incoming freshman quarterback Dylan Raiola, a 5-star quarterback who originally committed to Georgia, the Huskers could have the quarterback they needed last year. Defensively, Nebraska returns 8 players, including 3 of the top 4 players from last season. Isaac Gifford returns for his senior season. He had 86 tackles last year and is ready to lead the defense once again. The schedule is not as difficult as other teams in the Big Ten, and winning their first 7 games is not out of reach. October 26th will be a tough-to-win game at Ohio State, along with 4 out of the last 5, including the last 3 at USC, home against Wisconsin, and on the road to Iowa. That final stretch could keep them out of the Big Ten championship, but who knows? If they can get on a roll and keep momentum going down the stretch, getting to Indianapolis is not out of the question. However, I have Nebraska going 8-4 overall and 5-4 in conference. Northwestern is coming off an 8-5 season, and it will be tough to get back to 8 wins this season for second-year head coach David Braun. The Wildcats returned 7 players on offense, including leading rusher from last year Cam Porter, who ran for 673 yards and 4 touchdowns. A new quarterback could be a challenge for the offense to overcome. If he's on the same page with his receivers, then they will surprise teams this year, and they will have 3 winnable games to start the season to get on the same page. Wildcat fans hope they are able to do that. The defense returns 8 players, including 8 players that finished in the top 12 of tacklers for Northwestern last season. Linebacker Xander Mueller returns for his senior season. He had 110 tackles, 5 sacks, and 3 interceptions in 2023. Wow, what a season. The defense should be solid again this year. Home games against Indiana, Duke, Wisconsin, and Ohio State, along with road games at Washington, Iowa, and Michigan, make it very difficult schedule for the Wildcats. I have Northwestern going 3-9 overall and 0-9 in conference. Sorry, Wildcat fans. And is Coach Ryan Day on the hot seat? I know. How could someone who is 56-8 over 5 seasons be on the hot seat? Very simple. He's only 1-3 against Michigan, including losing 3 in a row. There was no game in 2020. Day's only win against Michigan was his first year as head coach in 2019. I personally believe if Ohio State loses to Michigan again this year, the only thing that can save Day's job would be a national championship. I know that'd be harsh, especially if he went 11-2 or better for the fourth year in a row. However, losing to your rival 4 years in a row is unacceptable, especially when that rival just won a national championship. Ohio State, though, is ready to finally get over the hump and beat that team from up north. They returned 7 players on offense, including leading rusher Trayvon Henderson, who ran for 956 yards and 11 touchdowns last year. The biggest question on offense will be transfer quarterback Will Howard. Howard transferred from Kansas State. He spent 4 seasons there and is expected to do big things for the Buckeyes. I'm not sure about that, but we'll see. On defense, Ohio State returns 9 starters. 4 of the top 8 tacklers from last season are back. Should be a really solid defense again this year. Schedule should be very manageable for them this year. Road games at Oregon and Penn State. Home games against Iowa, Nebraska, Indiana, and that team up north. The Buckeyes should be a very good football team this year. I have Ohio State going 10-1 overall and 8-1 in conference. And I do not have them losing to Michigan. Dan Lanning is in his 3rd year with the Ducks. Last season, he led Oregon to a 12-2 record, both losses coming to Washington. Lanning is leading the Ducks into their first year of the Big Ten, with 8 returning starters on offense. But the biggest name on the Ducks on offense is transferred quarterback Dillon Gabriel. Gabriel, who has spent the last 2 years at Oklahoma before that was at UCF, is a very experienced quarterback who will be in Heisman consideration starting the season. If he has Oregon in playoff contention, he will be in New York as a finalist for the Heisman. On defense, the Ducks have 9 returning starters, including Jeffrey Bassett, who had 71 tackles and 12 quarterback hurries in 2023. The defense has plenty of talent around it, and a loaded offense with a quarterback leader in Dillon Gabriel has them a top contender to play in the Big Ten championship. Oregon has Boise State, Ohio State, and Washington at home. Road games against Oregon State, UCLA, Michigan, and Wisconsin will be tough to manage. If they can manage their schedule with 2 losses or less, they will have a chance to make the playoffs. I have the Ducks going 12-0 overall and 9-0 in conference. James Franklin enters his 11th year as the head coach of the Penn State Nittany Lions. And the last 2 years, he's had the 3rd best team in the Big Ten and winning at least 10 games both years. The problem is he had to play Ohio State and Michigan both years and could not get a win either year against Michigan or Ohio State. Good news, though. Penn State doesn't have to play Michigan this year. Bad news, however, is the Nittany Lions still play Ohio State, and they get newcomers to the Big Ten in UCLA, USC, and Washington. They also still play Wisconsin, and a tough road game to start the season at West Virginia makes for a difficult schedule. Penn State only returns 6 players on offense. However, they have their key playmakers back in quarterback Drew Allar, who threw for over 2,600 yards last season with 25 touchdowns to only 2 interceptions. They also return experience at running back and wide receiver. With that type of leadership, I expect the Nittany Lions offense to improve from last year. The defense returned 7 players, including 4 out of the top 5 tacklers from last season, including strong safety Kevin Winston, who led Penn State in tackles last season with 60. The Nittany Lions are ready to compete for a Big Ten championship and have a chance to get there for the first time since 2016, where they beat Wisconsin for the Big Ten championship. I have Penn State going 11-1 overall and 8-1 in conference. Purdue will try to improve on a 4-8 season from a year ago. Purdue returns 8 players on offense, including quarterback Hudson Card, who threw for over 2,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. Card is going to have to throw for more touchdowns and less interceptions to give the Boilermakers a chance of improving from their 4-8 record last season. Defensively, Purdue returns 6 starters, including 4 of their top 6 defenders from last season. Free safety Dylan Thunneman returns for his sophomore season. Dylan was the leading tackler for the Boilermakers as a true freshman. He finished 2023 with 106 tackles and 6 interceptions. Not sure Purdue has much more than Dylan on defense, and with games at home against Notre Dame, Nebraska, Oregon, and Penn State, those games alone will make it hard for Purdue to get to 4 wins. To make things worse, they have to go on the road to Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. I just don't think Purdue has enough to improve from last year, and I have the Boilermakers going 3-9 overall and 2-7 in conference. Coach Greg Schiano is in his 5th year at Rutgers and will try to improve from a 7-6 season from a year ago. The Scarlet Knights returned 8 players on offense, including leading rusher from a year ago and junior running back Kyle Monangai, who ran for over 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. On defense, Rutgers returns 8 players and 6 of the 8 leading tacklers from last season. Linebacker Mohamed Toure is the leading returning tackler from last season with 93 tackles and 4.5 sacks. Coach Schiano is known to have physical teams with great defense and ground and pound on offense. I expect the same this year. Road games at Virginia Tech, Nebraska, USC could be too much for the Scarlet Knights, but with their style of play, they will have a chance to win all of those games. Home games against Washington, UCLA, and Illinois are all very winnable. Rutgers does not have to play Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, or Oregon, 4 of the top teams to compete for the Big Ten championship this year. If they can surprise some teams, they may find themselves in the hunt for the championship as well. I have Rutgers going 8-4 overall and 6-3 in conference. First-year head coach Deshaun Foster will lead his alma mater into the Big Ten and try to improve from an 8-5 season a year ago. UCLA has 7 returning starters on offense, including wide receiver Logan Loya. The junior wideout had 59 receptions a year ago with 655 yards and 5 touchdowns. The Bruins do have experience at quarterback and running back as well. Defense returns only 5 starters. Senior linebacker Kane Medrano is the leading returning tackler from a year ago, where he had 56 tackles. Defense is going to need to step up if the Bruins are going to win games this year. The defense also lost their defensive coordinator over to USC. They have a very tough schedule with home games against Oregon, Iowa, USC, and Fresno State. They also have to go on the road to Hawaii, LSU, Penn State, Rutgers, Nebraska, and Washington. It is going to be a welcome to the Big Ten season for UCLA and Coach Foster. That is not very welcoming. I have UCLA going 4-9 overall this year and just 2-7 in conference. USC also joins the Big Ten, and the road just got a lot harder for Coach Lincoln Riley and the Trojans. USC is coming off an 8-5 season, but lost their All-American quarterback and #1 overall draft pick, Caleb Williams, their leading rusher and their leading receiver. With an offense that only returns 5 starters, this will be the biggest challenge Riley has ever faced as a head coach, including his time at Oklahoma. He is known to be a genius in directing an offense. He will definitely be tested this season. On defense, the Trojans do return 9 starters. However, the Trojans were horrible on defense last year, which is a typical Lincoln Riley team. After letting longtime defensive coordinator Alex Grinch go, Coach Riley brought in D'Anton Lynn from UCLA. UCLA had one of the best defenses a year ago, and Coach Lynn has talent to work with at USC. I expect the Trojans to be better, but a very tough schedule could put Coach Riley on the hot seat. USC starts the season with a game in Vegas against LSU. They also go on the road to play Michigan, Washington, and UCLA this season. Home games against Wisconsin and Penn State, Nebraska, and Notre Dame are not easy wins either. I have the Trojans going 8-4 overall and 7-2 in conference. Washington is the 4th team to leave the Pac-12 for the Big Ten. The Huskies had a magical run last season, going 14-1 and playing in the national championship game before losing to future conference foe Michigan, a team they will get a rematch against this year. But the Huskies will look like a different team this year. They lost their head coach, who went to Alabama, their quarterback, who went to the NFL, their leading rusher, receiver, and their leading tacklers. So it's going to be a very difficult challenge for first-year coach Jedd Fisch, who comes over from Arizona. Washington only returns 2 players on offense and 4 players on defense. Like I said, this is going to be a totally new team. Schedule starts out with pretty easy games, and I see them going 4-0. But after that, wins will be hard to come by. They will have home games against Michigan, USC, and UCLA. Go on the road to Iowa, Indiana, Penn State, and Oregon. I have the Huskies going 4-8 overall and 1-8 in conference. We finish up our review going over Wisconsin. The Badgers went 7-6 last season and lost their leading rusher and their quarterback. They did get transferred from Miami in Tyler Van Dyke. The senior threw for over 7,000 yards in his career, so you could see the Badgers open it up more this season, something that is not new to Coach Fickell. He threw the ball around when he was at Cincinnati. On defense, Wisconsin returns their top 2 tacklers from a year ago in junior free safety Hunter Wohler, who led the team in tackles with 120, and linebacker Jake Chaney. The senior also had 80 tackles and 3 sacks for the Badgers last season. With 8 starters from a year ago, I expect the Badgers to be pretty good defensively. A tough non-conference game against Alabama will be a tough test in week 3. Other home games they have are Penn State and Oregon. Wisconsin goes on the road to USC, Rutgers, Iowa, and Nebraska. They could improve from last year, but I could also see them falling off. I have the Badgers going 7-5 overall and 5-4 in conference. So that is a breakdown for all 18 schools in the Big Ten. My order of finish is from last to first. Michigan State, Northwestern, both go 0-9 in conference. Minnesota, Washington, both go 1-8 in conference. Purdue, UCLA, and Maryland all three go 2-7 in conference. At 11, I have Illinois, who will be 4-5. I got them going 4-5 in conference. Wisconsin and Nebraska both go 5-4 in conference. Indiana, Rutgers both go 6-3 in conference. Michigan, USC both go 7-2 in conference. Iowa, Penn State, and Ohio State, all three tied for second at 8-1. I'm not sure at this point in time what the tiebreaker scenarios are, but Ohio State plays both Penn State and Iowa this season, and I have Ohio State winning both of those games. So that will tell you I have Iowa and Penn State's only losses coming to Ohio State. And I have Ohio State's only loss coming to the number one team, Oregon. I got them finishing at 9-0. So I have in the Big Ten Championship, number one Oregon at 12-0 overall and 9-0 in conference against number two Ohio State at 11-1 overall and 8-1 in conference. In a rematch from the regular season game that will be played in Eugene, Oregon, I have Ohio State winning the rematch and the Buckeyes, the 2024 Big Ten champions. So that wraps up this week's show, preseason preview of the Big Ten Conference. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell. That way you get notified every single time that Old Man Nate goes live or drops a video. Also, leave comments on what you think of the show, what you agree with, or what you think I lost my mind on. Also, take a few seconds and share it with your friends. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you next week as we break down the Big 12 Conference right here on Old Man Sports Talk.